Well, we look like we're about set. We can get started, and if more people join in, we'll add them in. We got
Sure.
Dr. Emma here today, and she'll introduce herself and tell you about what she brought with her, and I'll turn it over from here.
Okay, perfect. So yes, I'm Dr. Emma Wilder, a naturopathic physician, and I have been in practice in Colorado. And like we said, this upcoming week, I'm moving to Vermont and will be practicing there at a clinic that really specializes in primary care. And they're called Mountain View Natural Medicine. So I look forward to seeing anyone over in that area of the country. And I'm really excited for the shift, but it's been great to be in Colorado. So today we're just continuing nutrition series and talk about, all sorts of different topics. Specifically, we are looking at the Mediterranean diet today. And I think that I get a lot of questions about the Mediterranean diet because it's so widely recommended. We have cardiologists saying, oh, use, the Mediterranean diet for reducing your blood pressure and reducing cholesterol, preventing cardiovascular events like stroke and heart attack. We have people who say, oh, we see in studies that it decreases your blood sugar and helps if you have diabetes. It also is really helpful for joint pain and joint problems. And increasingly, we see that the Mediterranean diet has also been shown to help cognition and a healthy brain. So when we're thinking about Parkinson's or dementia or a variety of other things, we also see that the Mediterranean diet is really helpful. So today, I want to make sure that we're answering the question, actually, what is the Mediterranean diet? When we're doing these studies and we're looking at that region of the world, what are they actually eating? And I want to make sure we get that information to you all. So often we get kind of a watered down version of what the actual diet looks like. And I think if we're really looking for those outcomes, like if you're really wanting to shift your blood sugar or decrease dementia or decrease your high blood pressure, I want you to have the tools that you can actually succeed and mimic those studies and mimic that area of the world that we actually see those results. So the Mediterranean diet comes from several countries, but it's most commonly we're thinking of places like Greece and Italy and southern Spain. And it's essentially how the local people there, especially older generations, have been eating and the patterns of eating for hundreds of years. And then we do studies that are basically trying to mimic what those people are doing in their daily life and what they're eating. And, with Americans, with us who are, or, people from other parts of the world who are removed from those regions. And a lot of times, so like if you were to do a search and you were to look up what is the Mediterranean diet and you get some searches from Harvard, the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, those kind of places, you'll see something. I'll share my screen here of what you'll kind of see, but you'll see something that's again, what I would consider a pretty watered down version. So can you all see this?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is kind of what you would end up seeing, which is basically they say, eat some veggies, eat some fruits, whole grains, olive oil, beans, and nuts. And it's a little bit vague. And then they're saying like little or no meat, little or no sugary things. And they may give you, as we scroll down, they may give you a little bit of more specifics, like, okay, so for veggies, eat 3 servings a day, or whole grains and starchy vegetables, 3 to 6. Olive oil, anywhere between 1 to 4 servings. So I think that it's pretty vague. And we're also not really getting the specifics of how do I actually eat like those people? Because that's not actually what we do in the studies. We don't tell people in studies, eat anywhere between 3 to 6 servings of grains and starchy vegetables a day. In the studies, when we're actually trying to mimic how those people eat, we give very specific instructions and there's a lot more detail. So that's what I really want to cover today is if you really want to eat like these people and integrate that into your diet, I want you to be successful at that. And so I want to give you really the actual Mediterranean diet. Now, not to knock all of these kind of organizations or people trying to bring the information, I do think that for some people, those graphs are a great first place to start, because maybe they're not eating any beans, or maybe, you know, they're like, my vegetable that I eat is ketchup and I don't eat anything, you know, that's my vegetable of the day. So I do understand there's a place for that as a stepping stone. What I want to do though is give you the absolute, you know, fullest, most complete information, so that you can make decisions moving forward, and you can bring that to your providers and get additional detail and feedback. And I always recommend working with your doctor to make sure that, you know, the diet that you're doing, it works with your medications and works with the conditions that you have. But let's actually look at like what the real Mediterranean diet is. So let's start with what you are eating, and then we'll end up on what we're trying to exclude or limit. But I like to focus on what we're eating more than anything, because that also helps with our mentality of like, look at all the things that we can eat and look at all the things I am trying to include every day. And then naturally, when we're focusing on that, it fills up our plate and it fills up the meals in our day. And we're focusing less on like what we can't have. So mostly what people eat actually in the Mediterranean diet, collectively, we're looking at about 10 servings a day of fruits and vegetables. And just a reminder, servings, they vary between the food, but a lot of servings, you know, for example, like a half of an apple is like a serving of fruit for the larger apples that we get in the United States. Some small apples will be a whole serving, but servings are not, they're actually much smaller than I think a lot of people think. So we're really looking at 10 servings of fruits and veggies, a little bit more on the veggies than the fruits, but collectively, we're really trying to make that the bulk of what we're eating on every day. Typically in the Mediterranean, they eat 2 main meals. So you're thinking that my 2 main meals should definitely be about half vegetables to really reach that goal. The vegetables that they eat in the Mediterranean are certainly always include every single day some kind of leafy green. A lot of times the leafy greens coming out of that region are a little bit different than what we might find here. So a lot of people are collecting their leafy greens. They're eating sea vegetables, things like purslane, wild greens, mustard greens, different things like that. But for our purposes, if you have access to any of that, that's great. Otherwise, definitely make sure you're doing like at least a half cup of cooked leafy greens a day. You can eat raw as well, but truthfully, most people in that region are cooking their leafy greens and dark greens. And then other vegetables, it really, you know, there's a huge range of what you can eat. You can eat okra and eggplant, tubers, so thinking carrots and sweet potatoes. You can think aromatics, onions and garlic, cucumbers and tomatoes, which can kind of go between the fruit and vegetable line. So we just think about 10 servings a day. And really, again, it should be at least half or the majority of what you're eating on your 2, if you're eating the 2 main meals a day, which is typically how they do it in the Mediterranean. After that, everything is cooked and topped off liberally with olive oil. So olive oil in that region is the main oil that they use. And you just want to make sure that, so any kind of dressing or marinade that you're cooking with, or that you're topping everything off, will have a base of olive oil. And so this is going to replace, you're not going to use things like mayonnaise or ketchup or anything like that. Any kind of sauce that you're making will have the base of olive oil. Something that they cook, I'll get into something else specifically when we come with like kind of the condiment section, but we're topping everything off with olive oil. We are eating nuts every day as well. Now, I'm going to give you the specifics. So when we look at the specific studies, when we're trying to mimic the omega-3s, that's the healthy fat that we're trying to balance out and get it more of for most of us. So we want to look at eating a ratio of walnuts, and then all other nuts. So we want a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 times walnuts compared to your other mixed nuts. So in a lot of studies, they use almonds and hazelnuts as the other nut category. But you could also include things like pistachios, pine nuts, macadamia nuts, things like that. But think about a 2-to-1 ratio. So the way that I like to do it is if you, I take I have a large glass jar of all my mixed nuts, and I make sure that when I'm making that jar, I do half walnuts and then half the remaining mixed nuts, and then mix that all together. And then you're gonna eat about the size, if you put nuts on the palm of your hand, that's about how much I want you to eat every day of that ratio. So when we think about that, you can cook the nuts into like a rice dish, kind of like a pilaf or something like that. You can have it just as a snack. You can mix it up with fruit as part of a dessert. You can put it on top of salads. Like there are many ways to use it. You don't have to use it any one way, but that's what we're looking at in terms of nuts. They're a good snack, and they're good to mix in walnuts to other mixed nuts, 2-to-1 ratio. We are also looking at beans. So a lot of times the kind of information that we get, kind of the watered down version, is to have about a half cup a day of cooked beans. Again, in the Mediterranean, much more commonly, they're eating at least a cup, if not more, a day. So I would say to try to kind of mimic the Mediterranean diet, aim for at least a cup a day. And the beans that are more common there are going to be things like garbanzo or chickpeas, and a lot of white beans like cannelli beans. We'll see green beans, great northern beans, things like that. So we want to do beans every day, and that's going to be really important to feed our gut bacteria and give us some protein, give us some fiber, all of that. Then we do include some whole grains in that region, but I do think that can be a lot of confusion around the whole grains. So in the Mediterranean, most of the time, if they're having whole grains, it really is coming from, like, they take the whole grains, they're milling it themselves and like making pasta or making bread from scratch. And the bread, so much of the time, like in Sardinia region, for example, it's fermented. So it's a sourdough, and that's really much more healthy for our digestion. We can feed the good bacteria that we have. It's easier for us to break down, and it doesn't spike our blood sugar nearly as much. So when we go from blood sugar before we eat, and then we eat something and we get a huge spike, a huge raise in our blood sugar, that leads to inflammation and can lead to blood sugar dysregulation and things like diabetes down the line. So when we eat fermented things and whole grain version, it slows the curve. It's a gentler slope and much healthier for us. So thinking about, really, if you are going to be having any kind of bread, really it should be that whole grain sourdough, and really in a moderate amount. Traditionally, out of this region, cooking is a very family oriented event. So we're cooking, if you're going to go through the process of baking a loaf of bread, then the loaf of bread is going to be shared with the whole family. So you yourself aren't eating 4, 5, 6 slices of bread a day, kind of idea. And same thing if you're making, pasta or something like that, you're using a whole grain and it's fresh and you're sharing it with the whole family. I also know that there are, when we're thinking about this region, a lot of the whole grains are being used in much closer to their whole form. So instead of using it, processing it into a flour, so to make something like pasta or bread, most of the time the whole grain is being used in soups or in rice type dishes. So things like barley, millet, these grains are being used in that manner. So I think that is a huge shift for most of us as Americans or in the United States, because mostly we're eating so much more processed foods and foods that have been turned into flour. And then we're eating, hamburger buns, or we're eating bread on our sandwiches, or we're eating pasta. And these are all flour-based products. But I think, again, to really align with how they're eating in the Mediterranean, those are more special occasion items and things that are eaten a lot less. And if you're eating whole grains, they're incorporated in smaller amounts, as little pieces of barley mixed with your beans, mixed with your vegetables, all in a soup together. And that is really, you're not usually having more than 1 to 2 servings maximum a day of those kind of whole grains. And a lot of times, it's not an everyday occurrence. All right, so those are the main kind of, foods that make up the daily diet in the Mediterranean. Let's talk about the animal product side of this. So in the Mediterranean, we're thinking about eating fatty fish usually, or just fish, sea products in general, but certainly at least 1 serving of fatty fish a week. And sometimes you can go up to a couple of servings. Most of the time, these are kind of more locally caught smaller fish. So thinking like anchovies and sardines, that kind of idea. But usually, one serving of fatty fish a week at least. What I would recommend is go to the Environmental Working Group website, which is ewg.org, so environmentalworkinggroup.org. And they have a consumer guide that walks you through the quality of fish and which types right now have higher levels of mercury and other heavy metals, which fish are being sustainably harvested and caught. And I would follow that guide in terms of picking the quality of fish. Again, in the Mediterranean, a lot of these regions have access to fishing, or, they're traded much more locally. If you live somewhere that, you locally have access to fish, awesome. Otherwise, I would use the Environmental Working Group guideline to look at the fish that are lower in these heavy metals and think about incorporating those as part of the healthy fat and healthy protein intake, like once a week or up to a couple times a week, up to 3 times a week. The serving for fish and for animal products is going to be 4 ounces. So I would encourage you to actually kind of get a sense of that, measure that out, because again, in the United States, usually when you go out to like a restaurant, for example, you're getting something like 6 to 8 ounces of meat. A lot of times it's like an 8-ounce steak that you're given when you go out somewhere. So a lot about, if we're trying to mimic how people eat in the Mediterranean and follow this diet, we're definitely reducing the volume of meat that we eat in one sitting, or how much we eat. And we're, decreasing the amount during the week. So aim for about 4 ounces. You can have eggs a couple times a week. Eggs are also something that, again, think about smaller amounts. So if we go out, a lot of times it's like for breakfast, there's like a 3-egg omelet, right? It's, much more the standard here in the United States. And really, we're looking at eating maybe somewhere in the ballpark of like a couple eggs to 4 eggs a week. And so thinking about it more as a topping, like I have this, I have my greens, and maybe I've made a side of some sweet potato and some sofrito, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then I've added 1 egg on top of that. And I'm doing that a couple times a week. That's more the volume and the frequency, or how often we're talking about when it comes to eggs. And like I've mentioned in other talks, the quality matters. So we talked about the guide to fish. When it comes to eggs, really try, if you have access, try to go for eggs that are coming from hens that are pasture raised. They forage, and these eggs are going to have higher levels of that omega-3 fatty acid that we talked about, that healthy type of fat. And they'll have higher levels of vitamins and minerals like vitamin E, which is an important antioxidant for the brain and for the heart. So it also makes sense to me that when we are eating these products in smaller amounts, it makes it a little bit more accessible to buy quality. So maybe for you and your partner, if you're eating for 2 people, like once a week you buy a dozen eggs, and that's kind of the maximum that you're having, but you do a high quality egg shot. When it comes to cheeses and yogurts and things like that are used, again, very lightly. Most of the time we're thinking about sheep and goat. Those are just much more common in that region. So most of the time people are eating small amounts of sheep and goat cheese or some yogurt. Milk is not really, it's not a beverage that they consume. So that, you know, following the Mediterranean diet, we're definitely not drinking milk, but we can incorporate little amounts, and little amounts, like, again, just thinking, you know, just a very, very small amount, like a third of your palm of like a sprinkle of goat cheese on a salad, or you might incorporate for a dessert, just like a very small amount of yogurt with some fruit and honey drizzled on top, and like that's your dessert. So kind of thinking of it that way. So again, a couple times a week. And for these animal products, the fish, the eggs, and the dairy, if for you as an individual, you don't necessarily tolerate one of those things as well, then by no means do you have to have these. These are just kind of options that you can incorporate for healthy fats and proteins during the week. All right, so when it comes to meat, so we're talking really about the kind of flesh, like white meat, like chicken and turkey, red meats, things like that. Let's talk about it. So really, in the blue zones, it's very rare to have meat. White meat is consumed either not at all or very sparingly, or maybe up to like once or maybe twice a week. Again, about that 4 ounce amount. And red meat is really a special occasion. So for example, I'm first generation American on one side, so I'm all my family's from Greece. And when I would spend months at a time in the country in Greece, on the islands where my family is from, it would be like once a year they would kill a goat or kill a lamb and roast it over a fire, and it would be this huge celebration kind of once a year for a wedding, or think about for a holiday. And so you'd really have it very, very sparingly. A lot of times you will see in the guidelines that come through in the US, it'll say, you know, red meat once a month, and you can do that, but it, you know, it could even be more sparingly than that, or not at all. But definitely no more than, you know, once a month. It's just really not incorporated or eaten in the same way. Something very specific about the Mediterranean diet that is, I don't see at all in these recommendations, is that all meat, all pasta, fish, everything is consumed with something called sofrito. So what sofrito is, and I'm thinking kind of, we're taking the kind of Spanish or Italian or Greek take on this, which is it's a lot of tomatoes, onion, and garlic slowly cooked in olive oil, like over an hour, to really slow cook all those. And you can add in some herbs like rosemary, thyme, and oregano. But really the base is this slow cook of tomatoes, onions, and garlic. This is something that is consumed essentially every day. And again, to actually follow the Mediterranean diet, to follow what these studies are based off of, anytime you have fish, anytime you have meat, anytime you have pasta, when my family would incorporate it a lot of times into bean dishes and green beans, you would have this sofrito base. It is very high in antioxidants. One of the main antioxidants in tomatoes is called lycopene. You might have heard of lycopene as being healthy for the brain, healthy for the heart. Lycopene is not readily available in raw tomatoes, but the more that you cook it, and if you pair it with a healthy source of fat like the olive oil, you can actually then absorb it, and we can get so much more of that antioxidant. So now maybe people didn't necessarily have the same language that we do to talk about this, but this has been practiced for hundreds of years in that region. So if you are looking to follow the Mediterranean diet, making sofrito and having it available for the week so that you can pair it with your dishes and have a little bit every day is really important as part of this diet. So that's the recipe that I'm providing you all with today, is a sofrito recipe. It has a little spinoff from my family, my roots in Greece, but I hope you all enjoy it. I think it's really tasty. And again, just part of, if you are eating this diet, that this is something that you would consume, really regularly. If you as an individual are worried about, do I do well with tomatoes, and is that nightshade, is that okay for me? I would definitely take a look at, work with your naturopathic doctor or whomever it is to get that individual take, is that good for me specifically? But if we're following the Mediterranean diet and how these people have eaten and what these studies are, the studies have people eat sofrito basically every day, and always with any kind of meat and fish, with any kind of pasta, that sort of thing. So sofrito is definitely a big part of what we eat daily. Let's talk about beverages. So we mentioned that milk consumption is not part of the Mediterranean diet. Same thing with sodas, carbonated beverages, all of that is off the table. But what is on the table? Water, lots and lots of water, and herbal teas. And so I want to highlight just a couple of herbs that are really regularly consumed as tea there. So rosemary is a really common tea, and actually rosemary has been shown to improve cognitive function. So I really like rosemary tea when we're talking about, Parkinson's, early onset dementia, general memory challenges, and clarity of thought. So rosemary tea is great. We're also regularly consuming dandelion tea, things like sage. And so a lot of these kind of wild herbs in that region. Now, the whole world of herbal medicine, there are a lot of different herbal teas that you can consume. So again, I definitely recommend working with a naturopathic doctor and ND who is really highly trained with all these herbs, and they can give you as an individual specific recommendations of what might be really helpful. But in that region, we're definitely consuming at least 2 to 3 cups of herbal tea every day. And mint family, there are a lot of different options, and water. The one that works for a lot of people about this diet is that you can also have some vino or some wine in the evening, or more commonly actually the afternoon, anywhere between kind of your later lunch meal and the early evening, not too late because it can interfere with how you sleep. Now, if you're new to this diet, if you are not already drinking, we don't recommend that you start drinking. It's more that if you already consume alcohol regularly, it's shift over to, most commonly red wine, and it's in smaller amounts. So you're looking at a couple of ounces and focus more on that being the alcohol of choice. And other than that, that's really the beverages. So that's a big change for most Americans. We're not gonna do milk, we're not really doing juice, we're not doing sodas, nothing carbonated. We're really doing water or herbal teas. And then if you already drink alcohol, shifting that to smaller amounts, just a couple ounces of red wine. All right. Another important part of the Mediterranean diet that's actually incorporated into studies and how people eat is for those 2 main meals a day, you actually sit down and don't do anything else but eat for 20 minutes. That's in the studies, it's 20 minutes is the amount that typically is used. But think about it in this way, where so many of us eat while we watch TV, we eat while we're working, we eat standing up because we're in a rush in between different things. We may eat in a pretty stressful situation while having a difficult conversation with someone. But really in the Mediterranean, and if you're involved in any of these studies that actually show the benefits of the Mediterranean diet, they're requiring you to sit down and be in a very relaxed, calm state where you're not on your phone, you're not on TV, you're not doing anything stressful, you're not working, and you're just eating. And a lot of times this is done with family, with friends, but it doesn't have to be. But that's actually a very important part of the diet. And the reason why is our bodies, our nervous system, can't be really stressed out and really relaxed at the same time. So we've kind of broken it down in our bodies to, if I'm stressed, like I have to do that fight or flight response. That's called sympathetic nervous system or freeze. And if we're relaxed and we're able to digest, to do repair work, to be calm, that's called parasympathetic. And so if we want to bring good blood flow to our digestive tract, if we want to absorb the nutrients that we're eating, we need to be in parasympathetic or relaxed mode. And so it's so important that we're actually being calm and present when we eat. So that's why these studies are showing, and in the Mediterranean, it's showing us that to have really good health and to really get the benefits of all the food that we're eating, we want to make eating a time where we're focused on that and we're really relaxed. So that's actually part of the diet. That's actually part of the research study, is really focusing on eating in that way. Which again, that's a huge change for the average American, and something that I think is missed a lot of times when someone's like, eat the Mediterranean diet. It's not just about what food that we're putting in our body, it's how are we eating and how are we setting up our day so we actually can absorb and we can bring good blood flow. So that's another really important part. All right, make sure I got all the aspects of the Mediterranean diet. Oh, I think the thing we haven't talked about is sweets and desserts. So essentially, we're not really eating at all the kind of cakes, pastries, cookies, ice cream, any of that stuff is really not part of the Mediterranean diet. So what can be included will be like, if I'm, thinking about, I want a little sweet something at the end of the day, or I want a little sweet something at the end of the meal. We're thinking about maybe that will be like, I want, in the Mediterranean, you'd have like some figs, some fruit, some pomegranates, some nuts with, like I mentioned, like a little bit of honey over some nuts, or a little bit of honey over a little bit of yogurt with some fruit. So really whole foods. And there are some recipes of sweeter, more, special desserts. So something you might have like once on the weekend, or if you're getting together with some family or friends, and they do involve a little bit more of that baking and that kind of thing. And if you want to go into that whole world, this is from my kitchen. Can you see that? The Blue Zones kitchen. It's the cookbook from the Blue Zones. This is from the National Geographic version. I'm not affiliated with them at all. I just think it's a great book. 2 out of the 5 blue zones, which are the regions in the world where people live the longest and healthiest for the most part, as we're coming to understand it, 2 out of those 5 regions are in the Mediterranean. So this book goes over both of those regions and have lots of recipes and include some of those kind of healthier desserts that you might find there. And so they have a whole website and they have meal plans, and you can really deep dive into it. I recommend that as a book or as a resource, as a website.
What's the name again of the
Sure,
book?
it's called The Blue Zones Kitchen.
Okay.
And the author and one of the lead researchers on these blue zones, his name is Dan Buettner, or Buettner. I'm not sure how he pronounces it, but it's Buettner. It's his last name. And again, two out of the 5 regions in the world that's really looked at for these long and healthy living people are in the Mediterranean, and they follow basically what we're talking about here. The regions are a little bit, there's definitely a lot of specifics, but those regions, they're really focusing on eating a lot of vegetables, some fruits incorporated, legumes, the beans we're talking about, olive oil and nuts, herbal teas and waters, and that's really making up the majority of what they eat. And then they might sprinkle in some fish or sprinkle in some goat cheese or have eggs occasionally, like we talked about.
What about coffee?
So coffee is not part of the Mediterranean diet, but coffee is part of one of the other blue zones. It's in Nicoya, Nicaragua, and they do have coffee every day. So I'm totally fine with coffee. Again, so I basically think that your question almost leads us to our next point, which is like, in the Mediterranean, we don't find things like avocado, but a lot of us are told avocado is healthy and good for us. So like, where does that fit in? Basically, when we think about the Mediterranean diet, it is really focused on a lot of the foods that have been eaten there for hundreds of years. However, there are a lot of foods that are not typically consumed in that region that are still really healthy and are part of other long living communities. So like in Nicaragua, they regularly enjoy avocados, they enjoy coffee, they enjoy corn and squash and black beans as part of, you know, what's more endemic to their region. Interestingly, this is pretty interesting, tomatoes and lemons are from Central America. So even though we think of it sometimes as like quintessential Italian, like where would you be without your tomatoes and, you know, lemons in a lot of that cooking? It's actually, you know, it's technically not even from that region. So I think of, you know, food, you can definitely eat a lot of other foods, or there are a lot of foods. Another region of the blue zones is Okinawa, Japan. And so they're eating things like miso and turmeric and ginger and purple sweet potatoes and things that you wouldn't find in the Mediterranean, but are also all still very healthy and part of a diet of people who live really long, healthy lives. Yeah, go ahead, Robin.
Now gluten, you know, I can't have gluten. So you mentioned that grains, is wheat, barley, and rye all have gluten in them.
Mm-hmm.
I need to avoid those, and I think there was a fourth one, but I can't think of it. So I just eliminate those grains, make sure that I can still compensate by doing that. I know that Sprouts carries a sourdough, gluten-free sourdough by several manufacturers. Rudy, that's up in Boulder.
Okay.
So is that something you're talking about for all those, or if I want that?
Sure. So essentially, if like gluten is off the menu for you, you kind of have a few options, right? So one would be that you just don't eat as many, you just kind of avoid the world a little bit of like breads and pasta for the most part, but you can still eat whole grains. So you could look at millet, or you could look at teff, or you could look at brown rice, or you could look at some of the other grains that you could add. So you could like add in as part of a bowl, you have like a little bit of grains, a little bit of beans, some veggies, and you get to eat that just in the whole form for something that doesn't have, or you could add like quinoa, for example, which is sort of a grain meets a seed. And you could just do it that way. If you really wanted bread, if you're like, bread makes me happy and I want to be able to have a couple slices of toast a week, for example, just occasionally, you know, like a couple times, then looking for something that is made from a flour that does not come from wheat. And then if it's a whole grain sourdough that's gluten-free, that's even better.
And also the pasta, you know, they make, you know, like rice pasta, you know, spaghetti and all that. So if the pasta is made from one of those grains, or, you know, brown rice pasta, do you have to account for that? I guess not. It's still the type of serving that we're looking for, right?
Right. And again, there are a lot of people in that region that don't eat grains at all, or eat very sparingly. So in my book, you don't have to have pasta. Pasta does not have to be part of your, in other words, if you're not eating pasta, that's fine. However, if you're wanting some pasta, then if you have a whole grain option, like, oh, it's made out of, you know, I have brown rice pasta, then you could make some of that. Again, if we're following the Mediterranean diet, you would add some sofrito. You would include, you know, the sofrito as part of that dish, and you would have it with some other vegetables and some legumes probably.
What about chickpea pasta?
Chickpea pasta, yeah, absolutely. So again, the same idea that it's made out of, in this instance, it would be made out of a bean, and that's definitely part of the diet. And again, thinking that mostly we're not doing things that are made out of flour, because anytime you're making flour, you're really processing the original food into something that has less fiber, usually less, it changes the nutrient profile. Because if you think about it, like a garbanzo bean has the whole little like shell package and it has everything, and then it's processed down to something that has usually a little bit less fiber, sometimes less nutrients, and it's just a flour portion. So I would, across the board, I would rather you go for the whole food item. So like just eat the garbanzo beans, just eat the rice itself, stick with that kind of whole form rather than a pasta version. But if you occasionally, or once or twice a week or whatever it is, you want to enjoy pasta, then again, picking from those, any of those would work.
Is chickpea gluten-free?
Chickpea is gluten-free.
I have
Go ahead, Robin.
yeah, I like to eat raw nuts, so I and sprouts, carrots, like cashews and walnut versus ones that have been roasted. And I if they are roasted, I don't like the salt on them because that's too much. But is raw nuts versus a baked or cooked nut, is there an advantage between that, or should it be cooked?
So for most people, they can tolerate raw nuts. For most people, it's not a problem. For some people, if your digestion is a little bit compromised, you're not quite as good at digesting foods, then it can help to like soak the nuts for a bit, or have it be gently cooked as part of like a rice dish or something else. But so that would depend on you as an individual. So definitely work with your provider to see, do I struggle with digestion and breaking down and processing those healthy fats? But if a lot of people, most people are completely fine eating nuts, raw nuts. Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Go ahead.
A question about the sofrito. What's the like, how many tomatoes to the onions to garlic do you use?
Okay, I'm going to send you all the recipe.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any bread recipes?
I believe I do have, it's not my recipe. I can send you to, she's an RD, her name is Lily Nichols, and she has a whole grain sourdough bread recipe that's the one that I follow. So I can send you all a link to that.
Okay, that would be good.
Yeah, happy to do that. I feel like a lot of people with COVID really got into baking more so. So if you can make your own bread, that's amazing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there any other questions about what the Mediterranean diet is, how to incorporate it?
No, but it's a lot different than what I thought it was.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Well, I'm glad we're talking through it, because I do think, do you all feel this way? I feel like when I see those little pyramids or the little schemes, it's kind of vague. It's
Yeah.
not really giving you the specifics of like, what do I do every day and what things am I eating in what proportion?
Yeah.
I agree on that.
Yeah, and like how to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I will say this too, that I think the foundations and the kind of general idea is can be really helpful and applied across the board. So if you do want to enjoy some kind of Japanese food or something like that, you can kind of still have those basic ideas on board, and then add in, you can do some substitutions as well. But I do think something like the Blue Zones and a few other resources can be really helpful. And I'll send you all the names, like the Blue Zones, that we'll do the bread recipe, we'll do the sofrito recipe.
Okay.
Great. And with anything, I think too that the tortoise wins the race here. So if you're really wanting to like follow the Mediterranean diet and incorporate that, go slowly and just, integrate piece by piece what it means to really eat that way. and follow that diet so that you can be successful in the long run.
Is brown rice okay?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
So exactly. So in the Mediterranean, rice is not the most common grain, or some people don't eat it at all. But I think that a brown rice is definitely can be part of
Mhm,
a healthy whole food diet.
mhm. Yeah. That's been really helpful.
Good, good. So glad, so glad. Well,
Mm.
wonderful. I'm just curious, are there any other topics? I know we had last time a couple requests, one being, you know, how do we like read nutrition labels and navigate the grocery store and maybe navigate eating out, like that kind of idea. Are there any other topics that would be helpful or interesting for you all?
Maybe when you cook it, see, I'm just by myself, so cooking for once, and then because you have to cook for how much you. That's my big problem, knowing what to buy and how much, and then they have to plan to use it correctly, and then I guess have to freeze a lot of it.
Right, right.
And then I just so yeah, so I just need to do that, or maybe I have some resources if I get a hold, find somebody that can do that for me,
Mhm.
Right.
or stuff.
Help plan that out. Yeah. I do think that
Sure.
yeah, that can be such an issue where you're like let's say you did really want just a little bit of chicken. You're like, I want that 1 or 2 servings that week.
Mhm.
If you're eating again in that more like historic Mediterranean type, you'd have a family of like 6 or 8 people. So if you got the whole chicken, you'd make this whole pot with all the chicken and the vegetables and the beans, and then everyone would get a little, you know, one bowl of it. But when it's yourself, all of a sudden you have this large pot with
Right.
everything. And so I do think that freezing can play a really big role of like, I'm going to freeze out a couple of portions of that so I can enjoy it for the rest of the month, and pull it out. And batch cooking can be helpful. Another thing I've noticed a few people have been able to do is actually rotate a little bit of meal prep with friends or neighbors who may be interested in eating in a similar way. And that could be an idea where you're like, I have Thursday night dinner and I've made a portion that then I can share, you know, with friends or with neighbors. And then another night of the week or next week, they're doing something. So I get a break and I don't have to cook.
Okay.
So just another idea. And it's also can be helpful because then you can try other people's things. People can have different recipes and things that they want to try and share. And you even could have, again, a nice social meal time where everyone's just, we're following the Mediterranean way. We're relaxed. Maybe we have a little vino. We're enjoying good company, and just sharing food with friends. So
How about a list of your favorite vegetables? We try to eat 5 or more vegetables a day. We do a pretty good job of it. They're smaller servings. But
some of my favorite vegetables.
yeah,
Okay. Well, I like getting, I guess I think of it in 2 ways. I think one as staples of things that I pretty much always enjoy. So I can kind of lean on those more easily to just have continuity. And then I also really I love trying new things. So in terms of leafy dark greens, I love chard and collard greens, both of those. For cooking. So I saute, like at the beginning of the week, I make a big portion of those leafy greens and I cook them with garlic and some herbs and spices. And then I have portions of that throughout the week. It's really easy to just add in a little bit of the cooked greens, but I really like chard, like rainbow chard is probably my favorite, but I like collard greens as well. Both of those are really tasty. For raw dark greens, my favorite is kale, and I like to massage it with some olive oil. It like softens it a tiny bit, and I think that is super nice in a salad. Like to me, I'm a little over raw spinach salads. I don't know about you all, but I'm just sort of like not interested in that as much. I love spinach. I love cooking with it, but To me, like massaging the kale helps to just like slightly soften it with some olive oil before adding it into the rest of the salad. So dark leafy greens, I really like those. And then for soups, I like adding in like bok choy a lot when I do kind of more Asian style soups. So I like that. Root veggie wise, so more roots. I really like the purple sweet potatoes that are more common in Asian grocery stores, or I mean, some depending on the person. Like I can find my purple sweet potatoes and yellow sweet potatoes in King Soopers, right? So I like eating those. To me, they taste better than the orange variety. That's just me. So I like those as my root veggies a lot. But I also like beets and turnips and rutabagas. I just do like a whole mixture, so I'm getting different nutrients. I do like a whole pan of root veggies. So I just buy like some beets, some sweet potatoes, turnips, parsnips, and like chop them all up and just throw them on a big pan and roast them. So I like those veggies. And
Beets,
then,
turnips, and what was the third?
oh, sorry, I think
Beet-
two people talking.
Beets, turnips, and what else? Peru?
Beets, turnips, rutabagas, and sweet potatoes. Mhm. Go ahead, Robin.
Is that's like an onion, right? Big.
A leek? Yes. Yeah, a leek is like I think of it as like a really giant green onion or a scallion. The
Scallion.
flavor is a little different, definitely, but leeks, like if you make a soup, a creamy soup with like leek, you can do potatoes, and then I add in like a little rutabaga or a little turnip or parsnip or something to add like a slight different flavor. That's super tasty.
Real quick, what's a good snack? I mean, if I get hungry and beginning eating the small portions, if I want a snack or something, what's good to snack on?
Sure. So you can always do like leftover, like any part of your regular meals, you could always just do a small portion of that. I love nuts and seeds and fruit as snacks in any kind of combination. So for example, there are these, I think they're like broad category, they're called like little like energy balls or snack balls or like all sorts of things, but you can throw in a couple dates. You could put in like sesame seeds, almonds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, any number of things. Throw in a little bit of like coconut flakes to make it kind of chocolatey. You can add cacao powder, but you process it in a food processor, and the dates are sticky and sweet, and so that's what's going to help like hold everything together. And then you just roll them out, and then there are these little balls that are like, again, nuts, seeds, and then the date helps to hold it together. And you can do coconut, you can do cacao powder. I've even added in, instead of doing the chocolate, I'll add in like carrots, and then that gets all blended up, and it's almost like carrot cake, sort of.
Okay.
So you have like carrots and walnuts and the dates, and it's kind of this sweet thing. And I like those because you can just, again, pre-make it, roll them all into little balls, pop them in the freezer for like 30 minutes just to solidify them. And then you can keep them in a little Tupperware in your fridge and then just snack on those if you're a little tired of just like raw nuts or just like a piece of fruit or something. So there's all different types of recipes. So I like those. And then my other go-to snack is miso soup or like seaweed. If you're looking for something just kind of light. So I like the miso soup for several reasons, but one would be it's a fun way, and for me, a tasty way to get some of those sea vegetables. The miso is fermented, so it's really healthful for your gut, that good gut bacteria. And then if you add in a little bit of tofu, that's a legume. So you're getting some of your legume, has a little bit of protein. It's a very like balanced blood sugar type of snack. And very easy to digest, which is nice too, because with a snack, you don't want to eat something necessarily really heavy sometimes. So it's nice to have an option. So the miso soup is something too that like you can of course get like dried packets if you yourself can't make it. But you can also like, have some frozen that you've made or in the fridge. And that's not strict. That's definitely not from the Mediterranean region.
Yeah.
You know, if you were strictly following the Mediterranean, you could have like a small cup of like vegetable bean soup and like a vegetable broth. Mushrooms are eaten for sure in the Mediterranean. I think I think you all have had access, but I put out a recipe that is a mushroom walnut pate recipe that is very savory, very yummy, and I eat that with like cucumber slices.
Mhm.
That's very Mediterranean-esque and is a nice snack.
Hmm.
Lots of ideas.
Yeah. Hmm.
Wonderful. Well, if you all think of any other topics that you want to hear of in the future or other questions, feel free to just like share that with anyone that you get a hold of, right, with Parkinson's Point, and we'll definitely be in communication. And like I said, as I make this transition to Vermont and to Mountain View Natural Medicine, I'll be in communication with you all about kind of my new schedule and everything, and see if we have any changes. But we'll definitely be in communication if that's the case.
Great.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your Friday and the weekend.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
joining, everyone. You guys take care.